Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Between Two Markers with Paul Saxman. This week I'm joined by, actually also known as Google Developer Office Hours, or Google Maps Developer Office Hours. This week I'm joined with two special guests, very special guests from Sydney, Luke Mahe and Chris Broadfoot. And they're going to talk about the more than a map, the inner awesomeness of more than a map, because there's some really cool things going on, kind of, I don't know, what do you want to say, underneath the I'm sorry?
Behind the scenes?
Behind the scenes,
under the map,
under the map that we think developers will really be interested in. Before we go into the more than a map, though, we got a couple public service announcements. One is that if you guys have any questions along the way, definitely post them on YouTube. I'm going to be monitoring the YouTube channel for comments, and we'll try to answer those questions and get some answers for you guys. And the other thing is, if you guys haven't heard about it yet, hopefully you have, but there's the Google Developers or Google Places API Developers Challenge going on right now. And what we're doing is we're trying to get developers to kind of work with their communities to build mapping applications that kind of support their communities and also highlight kind of the some uses of the Google Places API. If you're interested in the challenge, you just go to developers.google.com/places/challenge. And that'll get you to the landing page. We'll show you the page in just a second. And from there, we have lots of information about kind of the timeline, kind of the types of apps we're looking for, rules and regulations, that type of thing, and kind of get you going there. The news about it, though, is that we're actually, the challenge is closing for submissions on October 31st. So you have just over 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get your submissions in, and so that we can review it. We're also having public voting for the People's Choice Award. That's actually going to start November 1st. So we pushed it forward a couple of weeks to get a few more submissions in before we open that up. So yeah, definitely check out the website. Chris will bring it up.
Prizes as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The prizes are pretty cool. If you take a look at the site, the prizes are actually tickets to Google I/O. And I think a $3,500 stipend to kind of get you here and keep you happy while you're here, if you know I/O doesn't keep you happy enough. And what else was it? There was.
I can have a look over on the website. Yeah.
And that's true for the for actually the judged awards. So we have judges that are actually.
People's Choice is 2 I/O tickets per team as well.
Yeah. So a lot of opportunities to win.
And you get dinner with us.
Yeah.
Oh, dinner with us.
Dinner with the Google Maps and Places API team.
Yeah, actually, you guys will be in town.
I didn't agree to that.
I think that's better than going to I/O.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So, especially probably all expenses paid, right? So, we'll try to take you someplace nice. But yeah, definitely. So check it out. Check the website out, and get your submissions in the next few weeks. And we're looking forward to seeing them. And with that, why don't we get into more than a map?
Sounds good.
So you guys don't need any introduction besides what I gave. I mean, Luke, you're our technical lead in developer relations down in Sydney. Chris, you're technical guy extraordinaire.
Maps API.
Yeah, work on Maps API.
So we launched this. Was it Tuesday last week?
It was Tuesday. Wednesday?
Tuesday, yeah. So if you haven't seen it yet, head over to morethanamap.com. And you'll see something like this, and it's got a whole bunch of cool demos, which we'll show off in a second, and some developer stories that you can go and watch. So these are guys that are using the Maps API to its full potential.
So quick, one sentence or less. Why did we launch this site? So what's our
to show people all the cool things they can do with the Maps API, and why you can really enhance your location-based app using the Maps API.
And do more than just put a map on your site.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of maps that are just a base Google map and a marker, which is great. It's good to see. But here we're showcasing some of the, I wouldn't say lesser used features, but the more valuable features of the Maps API. So we've got some satellite imagery, Street View, which is one of Google's unique features of Maps. Places data, directions, and we've got some really cool data visualization demos
Nice.
So Luke and I built out most of the site from a design from an agency.
Yeah, Upper Quad did some really cool designs for us, and we took that and built it.
Yeah. So I guess we really wanted to make this site blazingly fast. So you'll notice that as you click around, it's sort of quite fast to load the demos in and out, and all the pages load really quickly. And this is because it's all a single page site. So do you want to talk a bit about how we did that?
Yeah, so we created like a little MVC framework just to bind all the pages together. And what we mainly concentrated on was using one map throughout the whole site. So we don't create a new map every time we change the demo or anything like that. We just share the same map object around. So, we don't have to create a new map every single time. It's really cool.
So how many pages do you have, or how many views do you have based on that one map load, or actually one page load?
I mean, there's about I think 20 demos or so. So you could view all 20 demos and only use the one map. And so this is another good thing about this is you've only used one map load of your 25,000 a day to do your whole site. So generally you'd only need one map per visitor.
So that's kind of a worthy tidbit. So somebody that's, let's say, doing like a travel site and they want to do some kind of advanced search capabilities or give you the function where you want to say, like, go back and refine my search. You don't want them to actually go back out of your map, do all that work, and then go back into your map because that's another load. So using some techniques that you guys did, they could theoretically just one map load for all for one kind of one user basically, or one user visit.
I mean, and it's not only just that you use fewer map loads, but it's also a nicer user experience. So for example, if I go over to the data visualization demos, we have a flights demo. The map loads in, but if I switch over to the earthquakes demo, the map's still there. The tiles haven't moved, and this is just because we're using the same viewport. Yeah.
So how's the bandwidth on that? I mean, don't you guys, you have to load all the assets for all these pages kind of in advance, or?
Yeah, so because it's one page, we load everything up front, but then we cache it for a long time.
Cool.
But because we not refreshing the page every single time we change anything, we don't have to reload all the HTML and do that again.
Mm-hmm. Is it noticeable if you're on like a low bandwidth connection?
Yeah, I mean, you'll take a little bit more of a hit at the start because we load more, but then the rest of the experience is really slick. Right. So we figured that was a bit of a nicer experience, just to load it a little bit slower at the start, but then to have it better going along the rest.
So if I jump into the page source, you can see here that there's only one script tag. Oh, sorry, there's 3 script tags. There's the +1 button, the Maps API, and this thing called App Bundle. And this actually bundles in a whole bunch of different JavaScript. So you can see here at the top there's jQuery, and as I scroll down there's _JS. This library was so this is a library for directing URLs. I think it's called Director. This is a jQuery scroll wheel plugin, and then just below is all of our more than a map code. So this actually compiles down to something quite small because we've used all of these libraries. We could probably make it even smaller if we minified jQuery and everything to only include the functions we used, but we figured it's small enough, and fast enough.
So what are some of the other, you mentioned jQuery, and what are some of the other libraries you guys pulled in?
So we used _JS, which is a whole bunch of utility functions.
And we mainly used that for binding, so our code was a lot nicer, so we didn't have all these anonymous functions there anyway. Yeah,
and also there's a handy each and map function. So these are basically things that are in newer browsers JavaScripts, like map and filter. But yeah, we used it for cross-browser compatibility.
Nice.
And then the other one was Director.
So actually, I can show you quickly. So this is the Flatiron Director. So I think this comes from Node.js. So it seems like it's designed for server-side using Node.js, but we used it on the client side, and it has you basically set up your routes. So we might have /demos goes to a demo handler. /developer stories goes to the developer stories handler, and so on. So this was a really nice way to sort of have this really decoupled way of navigating the site. So yeah, we didn't really have to write any binding code for links on the page or anything like that.
But then it also handled all of the nice stuff of doing push state for us. So it would actually update the URL without having to reload the whole page.
Oh, right.
But then for older browsers, it would do a hashtag and use that as URL instead.
Actually, I can show you some of the code.
So it makes it easy for people can link directly to actually one of these.
Yeah. So
one
we
of
can
these
have
demos.
a URL that makes sense, and then people can share that. And yeah, Chris is going to show the code.
So this is our app controller. So this basically handles all of the binding of the whole app. And you can see down below, we set up a new router, and we set up a whole bunch of routes. So anything under /demos goes to a function called show demo, developer stories, and then there's just a general page handler that just handles, like for example, the learn more page, which doesn't really do anything particularly special.
So any server-side processing? I mean, are you guys serving up data or?
Well, we got a couple of JSON files, but they're static.
Static
JSON
files.
Yeah. Stuff like the flights data, the population demos data, but everything else is a static HTML page, static JavaScript, so we can cache it for ages.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean the only notable thing is that since we're using push state and it's a one-page site, if you send a link to your friend, say to a particular demo, then we need to handle the entry to a particular page. So we do this by serving up the same HTML to every single page, and then the router will go and figure out where to put the initial page load.
And then the way we did our demo views in our MVC framework was every demo knows how to bootstrap itself from start to the end. But if it gets given it's like loads itself halfway through, it knows how to get there.
Yeah.
Very cool. So then, in terms of hosting, what did you guys? I think I already know the answer. But
It's sitting on App Engine.
App Engine.
Yeah.
Oh
But
yeah. So App Engine was great for static serving static files as well. I think we had about 150 loads to our JavaScript over the whole day, which was amazing for
Everything was just cached.
I mean, yeah. It wouldn't matter how many page views we had; it would have still served about 150, 200 requests. So I think it was actually quite cheap to serve the whole app because it was all out of public caches.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let's think. So any other code you guys want to? So what percentage roughly of like kind of your MVC framework and kind of maps code?
Mainly it was the maps because each one is an individual demo that does stuff that's really different. So the MVC code we made was just saying to be really, really small and lightweight that just did what we wanted to, which was essentially just load a demo with a map, whether it be normal maps or Street View, and then initiate its demo.
Cool.
We designed the framework so that we could add demos easily and quickly. I wouldn't say that the framework code is small, but it's lightweight and really flexible.
So where would developers go to kind of replicate what you guys did?
Ours is quite unique to what we wanted because it's about a map. So we took some caveats with knowing that we're going to be dealing with a map. So some stuff like knowing that we're passing in map objects and options for that and reading through those rather than just being a standard like any sort of object MVC framework.
Yeah, I mean if I were to do it again, I probably would have taken some time to learn AngularJS. And see whether that would suit something like this. But we're trying to get this out the door and just work with what we know. And it's sort of nice being able to reckon with all of the code. If you use a library like Angular, there's so many moving parts that if you don't know the library very well, it probably would have slowed us down. Yeah. I mean, even using the director library, which is quite small, we still had to step through the code to figure out some bugs and figure out what's going on. Like for example, if I look at the setup.js file, there's a little I would maybe call it a hack, but if the browser doesn't have history support like older versions of IE, and the user navigated from a single page, then we'd have to redirect to a hash / URL so that the director library would still route it properly.
And also then they don't end up with a long URL / a hash, another long URL.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Yeah. So AngularJS probably a good place to start looking if you want to replicate this kind of one map, multiple views.
Yeah, I think so.
Type framework.
Yeah.
And then developers look at the code for the more than a map site. It's probably going to be a little hairy just because you're using compiled.
It's all compiled, so it's going to be interesting to read if you feel like viewing the source. But I think we're going to try and open source a couple of demos.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So can you show us like your favorite piece of code in the
I think
entire
my
thing?
favorite piece of code would be the flights demo.
Okay.
So because it's a lot of flights, and we're actually using polylines with the new symbols on polylines, and what we did, instead of just having like a constant loop that looped through every single polyline and then moved the plane a little bit, we put every single line in its own animation frame. And so the line just animated itself, and then when it got to the end of its animation cycle, just cleared out the animation frame for itself, and then just moved on. And we found that the performance was really great compared to just constantly looping through an array of every single line that you currently have active.
So I think the reason for that is we were doing as much work as possible within each frame, but if a particular plane didn't sort of make that frame, then it would just go into the next frame. So as there's more and more planes, it doesn't get less smooth, but the planes might jump slightly more each time.
Oh, I see.
Instead of, but yeah, only some planes would jump instead of all of them, I suppose. And the map is still quite responsive.
And you're also using symbols here, right?
Yeah,
Marker
this is the new
symbols.
symbols on polylines.
So you have like a vector-based plane, and everything's kind of.
I loaded up Illustrator and drew a little plane, and it's just a single SVG path. And
Export to SVG.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the thing I really liked about this demo too is you used what did you call it again? So it's not a direct line, right?
we're using geodesic lines.
Geodesic lines.
So the planes fly on the curve.
Yeah, and since you're using the symbols, it actually kind of adjusts its orientation as it kind of flies, which is
exactly.
kind of a really cool effect.
So if we look at the code for that one, it's flights demo. So you can see a little bit of our framework here. We have a base demo class. So the flights demo sort of just bootstraps itself, calls up to the demo prototype, the demo constructor rather. It sets a whole bunch of options. So we've got the map style, zoom and center. And then basically when the flights demo loads, a function called init is called, and that's just on the first load only, so we load in the data. And if we look at the load data function, we use getJSON from jQuery, and once that's finished we call the load data complete function. And you can see here that we're using the underscore library to bind the function. So if you knew you were working with modern browsers, you could just use the function.bind that's built into JavaScript. But yeah, again, cross-browser compatibility. And then once the data is finished loading, load data complete is called, and the start function is called. And do you want to talk about what happens here? When start is called?
Yeah, let's start. So firstly, we just take a copy of the array. So that way, if someone wants to run the demo again, we're not getting the JSON file again and parsing it. So, and then we just loop through. We set the time, and then.
So set map time's the interesting part.
Yeah.
So there's a magic number.
There is a magic number to convert from the time number we have to what the time of the actual flight was.
Yeah.
And then we basically just loop through all the flights that we have in that block of time, create a new animation frame.
So I think add flight is the most interesting part here.
Yeah.
So we
So we have the start and we have the end locations, and so that way we can find the distance. And just to be nice, we decided that every plane flies at 950 kilometers an hour because it just made sense, and that way everything kind of just flowed well, which apparently is like the average flying time, I think, in flying speed. And so then we create a symbol, and then depending on whether it's flying into London or out of London, we set its color. And then here we have a little function that says animate plane.
Yeah, so this is probably the most interesting part. So animate plane gets called every frame. When request animation frame gets called for it. So it might miss a frame sometimes. And if the plane's in flight, then we just move the icon. Once it reaches the destination, it fades out.
Yeah, so you can see.
I think actually it stays there for a little bit.
It stays there for a little bit and fades out. So you can see here we've got, like, if it's greater than 100, we set its opacity, and then we start like fading out a bit. And then when it gets to 120, we get rid of that polyline and we don't call the animation frame.
Yeah.
So all this fading is part of the markers.
Yeah, we're just setting
symbols.
the opacity.
Nice.
Just to make it look a bit nicer. The planes just didn't disappear as soon as they got there.
Yeah, so if you want to do visualizations like this, definitely check out symbols and symbols on polylines. I'll just quickly show the earthquakes demo once that loads in. So this actually uses symbols again, but symbols on markers. So because the symbols aren't animating, it's just in a marker. And again, we use request animation frame for each earthquake. And once the quake has disappeared, then the function just disappears, doesn't get called again.
Cool. And the markers, for people that aren't really familiar with them, they're basically like vector graphics, right? But you're defining it in JSON or some kind of JavaScript
it's an SVG
notation?
path. It's not actually rendered using SVG. Usually it's rendered using Canvas. But you define it using an SVG path, and then you can set a fill color, a stroke color, and stroke weight as well.
Very cool. And it can look
and
like
a scale, of course, and rotation.
And opacity.
Yes, and opacity.
nice.
So it's quite flexible.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Chris, did you have any code you wanted? Or you also a big fan of the?
He
planes?
likes the earthquakes. That's because I built flights and he built earthquakes.
I do like the earthquakes
So
demo.
we have this little battle going.
Although I think the population demo was the one that captured more of the audience.
This is
of
heat
the ones
maps?
I built. Yeah. So and I don't know why. I think it's probably because it restarts. So after we traveled through from 1970 to 1950 to 2025, and after that it just fades out and then restarts. So I think people left it up on their
And people
screen.
just sat there and watched it. It'd be cool if it went backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else is cool?
So this is obviously using the heat maps. So you've loaded all the heat map data for. Did you have to actually kind of condense the data to get?
So I think it came from it might have been World Health Organization. I can't remember. Some public data set that it was just all the different years and different countries, and then I just interpolate between the years that we actually have data.
Cool.
Yeah.
So a very valuable data set and not a lot of manipulation to kind of get it in a map.
Yeah,
That's kind of the
exactly.
story there. Good. Cool.
So do you want to talk about? So we have this cool developer stories page that fills up the whole screen, and as you scroll down, it sort of moves to the next slide.
Yeah. So I mean, this was kind of cool. We originally did it with scroll bars, and it was just a bunch of divs on a page. But then our designer thought it'd be cool not to have scroll bars and to use the scroll wheel to just scroll sections at a time. And this was fun because the magic mouse is an interesting thing to play with.
Yeah.
Because normal scroll wheels, you get a value of -1 or 1, but the magic mouse accelerates and decelerates. So you get, depending on how fast someone's scrolled, you get a number between like -50 and +50, and it goes up and down and keeps calling your function. So we had to do some interesting things, like if you scrolled, like set a value and timeout to clear that if you're no longer scrolling. So
This would actually
scroll.
be a really good thing for someone to write a library for and test it properly, because we only had a variety of mice to test it against.
It wasn't until our designer said, I was like, I scroll and it just goes the entire page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I can attest. I use one, and most websites don't do it right.
Should we look at some of the code for that?
I don't know.
We're actually getting close to time, but
But this is kind of cool. So you could click on the circles, and we just like animated scroll down to the bottom, and same thing with the magic mouse.
And again, you can see the URL changes, even though it seems like it's all on one page, but the URL still updates so that people can hot link it to their friends.
Yeah, so they can send a link directly to that video in that section, which is kind of nice. So as you're scrolling down, even though the page isn't updating, the URL at the top is.
right.
Oh, I should have talked about analytics as well.
Oh, right.
So
That's cool.
Because you only have one page load, but
We have one page load, so what we did was we have one listener on the whole site for any A tag, and we just capture that event and then handle the routing ourselves and also handle the analytics tracking ourselves.
So whenever the user navigates, we call this log URL function that just goes and gets the path from the router. So even if people aren't on a HTML5 history supported browser, the page view is still tracked really nicely. So we had really great analytics for this site. So log URLs called on from the app controllers functions.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe we'll wrap up with that. And so, thanks for flying up to
Because we came here just for this.
Yeah, these guys are actually here for we're having a team meeting. Shindig. Yeah. I won't say what it is going to be on the air, but it should be fun. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for giving the demo, guys. This is pretty awesome stuff, and definitely we'll see what we can share. Like you mentioned, we're going to share some demos out for developers at some point.
Sure, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to email us.
Yeah, I took a look. No questions right now, but let me take one more page reload.
Yes.
Unfortunately, yeah, to triple check and make sure I had commenting on. Yeah, I know I did, but yeah, if you guys have any questions after you watch this, post them in the comments in YouTube, and we'll try to get back to you guys. And with that, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you guys in about a week. Probably, I know that's a Sydney week, but you guys might be off the hook because we're here today. But anyways, we'll be either in Sydney or Mountain View in about a week. So thanks again, and see you guys later.
Thanks, Paul.